Why do you want to abort me?" This story had been spread in our city a long time ago. Everyone who heard this would get angry and sympathized. I'm gonna tell you about it in no time. The protagonist is Sophia, a woman who had killed her 3 own kids for her lover. That day, Sophia came to the hospital. She had pregnant her 4th son. You didn't hear wrong. That was her 4th pregnancy, but the man she loved and the father of her kid wanted her to abort the baby. She said hello to Dr. James. He asked her why she came, what happened to her. Dr. James had known her because of her earlier abortions. After hearing Sophia told her decision, Dr. James stopped her because that was her 4th abortion. She might get a big chance of being infertility. Later on, he convinced her he had no idea how the young generation lived if they were not ready to be parents, why they didn't use any of contraceptives when they were having sex. She had aborted 3 times. If she made it that time, she would have no chance to become a mother anymore. Sophia was very scared once she heard Dr. James's warning. No woman in this world didn't want to have kids. How she could live her life without children later on. Finally, she had been touched. She left and decided to deliver the baby. She wanted to have that baby. She wanted to be a mother. Sophia picked up the phone and called the love of her life on her way home. All she could hear was a sound in response. Sophia kept her patience and called her boyfriend multiple times until he picked up the phone. He finally replied to the call. His voice sounded like he was annoyed. He complained her why she could call him at that moment. He was in a meeting and asked her if she could call him back later. Sophia was both scared and excited to announce to Lucas. She was a bit confused and faltered to him, "Honey, the doctor said that I could not abort this baby this time." She was afraid that Lucas would once again demand her to abort their baby. Lucas surprisingly replied, "What was she talking about?" Sophia thought that the other end must mishear what she told, so she volumed up her phone and clearly repeated to him word by word. She said that she was unable to abort the baby. And if she did it, she would never have a chance to be pregnant again. She hoped that her man would agree to keep their baby. The other end had stopped a few seconds. Sophia thought that her man had hung up the phone. But he spoke up afterward. He wanted to talk later about that. He had an important meeting, then hung up the phone. After Lucas hung up the phone, Sophia felt that she was exhausted. She quietly sat on the couch for a very long time. She couldn't stand up. And the night came, while Sophia was scared in weight and exhaustion. Finally, the love of her life returned home. But right after he stepped into the house, he asked Sophia why she didn't abort the baby. Sophia had thought that Lucas would soothe her as earlier. But his first words he gave her a heartbroken. Sophia cried her eyes out in resentments. She explained to him about her situation. Like the other women, she wanted to become a mother and wanted to have a baby with him. Lucas realized that he was a bit overreacted and excessive, so he tried to calm down and comforted Sophia. He told her that they were still young and how she would be infertile. He wanted her to go to the hospital the next day to abort the baby. Seeing Lucas had toned down his voice but still wanted her to kill her baby, Sophia insisted on him to keep the baby. She said that she wanted to keep the baby alive and deliver the child to this world. Seeing her determination, Lucas showed his real face as a playboy. He told Sophia that it was her call if she wanted to keep that baby. Let's deliver the baby to this life and raise the kid by herself. He didn't want to involve. He closed the door afterward and left Sophia standing there all alone. She stared at the door and started to cry. She realized that she was wrong from the start. How could she was in love with that disgusting man? She recalled the first time she had seen Lucas. That year, Sophia had just graduated from the university. She was lonely in the new city. She had met up with Lucas coincidentally. He was her first manager, gave her the first job in her life. She had thanked him a lot for the opportunity. She promised him to work hard for the company. Lucas replied that he believed she would be the best fit for the position, and she didn't need to thank him. Lucas was older, 10 years old than her. At first, he was like an older brother to her. Sometimes, they hung out at the restaurant or watched movies together after work. Day by day, Lucas's care made her falling for him and depended on him without noticing. Every time he flattered her, she was in over cloud nine. Finally, the day had come. Lucas confessed to the lovely young staff, he loved Sophia. Without a doubt, Sophia agreed to be his girlfriend. Instantly, she replied that she loved him too. So they started their sweet relationship. But the beautiful time between the two had not lasted long. One day, she went shopping by herself and realized that Lucas, her lover, didn't have only her. It turned out Lucas had a wife already, too surprised to handle. Sophia had never thought she would become the third wheel, destroy the other's family happiness. That was again her ethical rule. She wanted to put an end to their relationship instantly, but at the moment, she realized that she was unable to do that. Sophia was madly in love with that man and couldn't live without him. It was very painful how everything turned to be like that. Since Sophia started the relationship with Lucas, she had left the job, and she had depended financially on that evil man. The thing that drove her more crazy and hard to make the decision was she had been pregnant already. Her first baby who she wanted to give birth. She didn't want her baby to grow up without a father. Finally, she put all of her hopes into that man. He told her that he loved her deeply and would divorce his current wife, marry her, and gave her a home in the future. She asked him when he was going to marry her. He explained that he needed time to settle things down. Everything was like a mess to him. He was unable to divorce his wife at that moment and marry her right away. He promised that she would give her a stable and bright future. He would not let her down. Hearing those sweet talks, Sophia forgave him, and she hoped one day she would be his official legal wife. But she wanted him to know that she was pregnant with him. The man didn't express the happiness in his face but requested Sophia to have feticide. He convinced her that they shouldn't have a baby at that moment. She gotta listen to him. They had to wait for another appropriate time to have a baby later. Sophia was the first time carrying a baby in her belly. How she agreed to kill her own unborn son or daughter. That was a criminal. She rejected that ideas. She told him that she couldn't do that. But the jerk continued. He was in his heyday. He was developing his career and wanted to take another step to another level. So he wanted to focus on his job and the company at that time. They would have plenty of time to have a kid. Finally, Sophia had been convinced by Lucas, even though she had been heartbroken, but she decided to have feticide. She wanted him to promise her that he would give her a better life in the future to make up for her. And so, from time to time, Sophia had come to the hospital 3 times for her abortions. She felt like she killed her unborn children on her own. And the 4th time, she had thought that Lucas would agree and let her deliver his child, but she didn't ever think that he was such a ruthless person. She stared at the door. All she could do at that moment was crying. Her face was quickly full of tears. She had no ideas about her future. Time flew. It was more than a month since the day Lucas shut the door up in front of her. He didn't appear or contact her from that day, even though she had called and texted him countless times, but he had never replied back. Sophia drowned in desperation and loneliness. She was really scared, didn't have a gut to tell her family, and didn't want to abort the baby. She locked her in the room and cried. She wondered why the bad things happened to her. In her 5th month of pregnancy, out of the blue, Lucas appeared in her house and brought her lots of vitamins as well. He looked happy. Lucas gave Sophia his sorry for not treating her well earlier and told her that he had divorced his wife already. He promised her to marry her once their kid was born. He wanted to call her the whole time, but he was busy with the divorce process. He wanted to cut off contact with her to hide her from everyone. Hearing those sweet talks, once again, Sophia gave a relieved sigh. She asked if what she heard was the truth. And so the two of them got back to normal as before. That night, Lucas told her that he wanted to cook for her. He wanted to make up for her and the kid for what they had been through the whole time. Sophia looked after her man, who was busy in the kitchen, make her a meal. She gave a happy smile. She felt warm and let her mind ran. She finally had her home. Lucas didn't know how to cook. He made her the best thing he could, which was soup. Sophia was very excited. That was the very first time he made her something to eat by himself. She happily picked up the bowl and ate the soup. She gave her boyfriend a compliment. The soup was so delicious. Once she finished half of the bowl, Sophia felt hurt from her stomach. She shouted out why she felt that bad. Lucas replied that was because he had put an abortion pill in her soup. At that moment, Sophia realized the unusual behavior suddenly of her lover. He had a purpose once he backed. Sophia was hurt like hell. She was unable even to hold the bowl in her hands. She released the bowl on her hands. The bowl fell out to the ground and broke into pieces. That was like how her heart broke as well. She yelled out why he could do that. How could he cruelly do that to her and her unborn child? Lucas quickly closed his stage. He replied with the coldest-hearted, despisingly smile she had ever seen. Why? That was all because of you. You're stubborn. That was all her fault to push him to do that, so she shouldn't blame him. Sophia was scared to death. She realized that she didn't want that jerk anymore. Everything she wanted was her child. She begged Lucas to save the child. She promised him that she would raise the kid by herself. She would never come to bother him. That was his kid. Please help her save the kid. She needed her baby. But Lucas had pushed the miserable woman violently in front of him out. He told her that she better got away from him. How she wanted that baby if he didn't stay with her anymore. He got bored of her and wanted to put an end to their relationship. Abortion was the right thing to do at that moment. His voice had stroked her strongly. She was like falling from the sky high to hell. She was both in pain and disgrace. Lucas finished his words and left her without a look back. She screamed a big no aloud in pain, laid on the ground. She was bleeding her underbody. There was a pool of blood around her. She was so depressed, bent out her body on the ground. She cried out and was regretful. She knew that she was unable to save the child on her fetus. The woman struggled in the darkroom, and the great darkness had swallowed her small body. A week later, police had come to the residential area. People had smelt a rotten smell. They suspected that was from a woman named Sophia's apartment. They had no idea how to contact the apartment's owner, so they called the police. After careful investigation, the victim was Sophia. She had died a few days earlier. The forensic team had given a final result about her death because she had taken an overdose of the abortion pill when home alone. No one took her to the hospital. She was bleeding to death. Regarding Lucas, he made that cruel decision because his wife had been pregnant as well. After 10 years, his wife finally could have a baby. From the day he heard about that good news, he took very good care of his wife. Finally, on the day his wife delivered, he had a butterfly in his stomach during waiting outside the delivery room. After 2 hours of waiting, the doctor brought him the baby and congratulated him. His wife had a healthy delivery. Lucas happily smiled. He received his baby from the doctor and welcomed his child into the world. He was happier when hearing that was a son. He was trembled and took his son as lightly as possible from the doctor. Once Lucas took the baby, his son stopped crying instantly. Lucas suddenly saw his son's face turn to Sophia's, and his son smiled at him demonically. His baby spoke to him scarily about why Lucas aborts him. Lucas was scared to death. He tossed the baby into the air and ran away. The doctor was frightened. He hurriedly took the baby and yelled at Lucas. What was he doing? How could he toss the baby like that? At that moment, Lucas was too frightened to answer. He ran away and screamed aloud, "Don't come to kill him." The baby was safe and cried aloud in the doctor's arm. The little boy seemed to be very scared. The doctor had no idea what wrong with the baby's father. Lucas ran out of the hospital in panic. Once he ran across the street, he had been hit by a car and died instantly. Lucas had died. People confirmed that was an accident. The driver wasn't guilty. That was all because Lucas had run out of the street from nowhere. But the thing was, no one knew how he could be in shock once he saw his baby son. There was no one could see Sophia's soul nearby. She stood there, with her 4 babies and looked at the dead man. She said to them she had been wrongdoing to them. She hoped the 4 of them could have a better life and a happy family next time. Finally, Sophia and her baby's spirits had faded out in the air. Probably they had to continue the next step of their destiny cycles.